is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, January 6th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Nathan J. Robinson, editor-in-chief of Current Affairs, author or co-author of The Myth of American Idealism, How U.S. Foreign Policy Endangers the World. Again, co-authored with Noam Chomsky. Also on the program today, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announces his resignation. Did I say it's 2024?
I don't remember.
It's 2025. Mike Johnson, in 2025, remains Speaker of the House for now. Meanwhile, new Senate Majority Leader Thune says Pete Hegseth, yes, has the votes to secure his Secretary of Defense nomination.
Oh, boy.
Biden administration bans new offshore drilling in almost all federal waters. New York City congestion pricing starts today. First city in the country to institute congestion pricing. Meanwhile, Biden signs the Social Security Fairness Act, which ups benefits for 3 million public workers who have been receiving reduced benefits for years. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau sues Walmart for forcing drivers into high-fee bank accounts. Biden sells another $8 billion of arms sales to Israel. This, as the American Historical Association overwhelmingly votes in favor of a resolution opposing Israel's scholasticide in Gaza. In other words, they've destroyed the entire education system there. Pulitzer-winning cartoonist quits the Washington Post after it pulls a cartoon lampooning billionaire tributes to Trump. This, as Elon Musk announces that the Twitter algorithm is going to change to make things seem rosier.
Oh, that's
Is it going to
convenient.
highlight his message to a EU guy saying F you R word?
No.
I guess we'll see. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. It is...
Fun Day Monday?
Yes.
It's also January 6th. So today is
Son of a gun.
the fourth anniversary of that attempt.
Oh, I thought you said I said it wrong. Yeah.
No.
Oh, happy failed coup day.
Yeah.
Happy failed coup
Yeah,
day.
you said January 5th, 2023.
Yeah.
Close enough.
Yeah. I know. I think I'm working on a head cold. I'm not sure. Something's going on.
All right.
But I did test. I don't have COVID.
That's good to know. I'm excited about the congestion pricing thing, though.
I love it.
Already seen some positive anecdotes from the past 48 hours from people in the area and journalists on social media about how it's helped their commutes and that kind of thing. And it'll help with the air quality here in the city, too.
It's going to help with the air quality. It's going to help with the traffic. It's going to hopefully help finance improvements on the subway system. All around win-win-win. Unless you are taking your limo from 61st Street up to 79th Street. In that case, it's going to stink.
I'm one of the people struggling to get by that drives into Lower Manhattan to work every day.
Right. Yeah.
JJ on the IM says, is it a failed coup, though? Good point. Good point. I don't know. I guess we could spend a lot of time thinking about that and debating that question. But in the meantime, we have other fish to fry at the moment. During the course of the show yesterday, by the end of the show, it was clear that Mike Johnson had won the speakership on the. Was it the second vote, or did they have to take a second vote, or was it actually just the first vote was so stalled?
They kept the vote open.
Okay. Yeah. Now, just to make it clear what happened. During the course of the vote on Friday, there were two, Massey and I think it was Ralph Norman, who had voted against Mike Johnson as speaker and had voted for a different person. I think one had voted, I don't know who Massey voted. One voted for the, what's the name of that guy who...
Donald?
Tom Emmer.
No, he's the one who allowed for his wrestling students to be molested.
Jim Jordan?
Right. Not to be confused with Denny Hastert, former Republican Speaker of the House, who actually was a wrestling coach who molested his wrestlers. Jim Jordan only just turned a blind eye to it, despite the fact that he was told over and over again by the students. Anyways, that's a side story. And what you can do, the vote has to be open for X amount of time. And there have been times in the past where votes are kept open for longer. This happened in the expansion of Medicare Part D with Tom DeLay back in like 2000, I think 2004 or 5, if I remember correctly. They keep the vote open to get people to change their votes. And we saw during the vote, Mike Johnson run to the cloakroom, and Ralph Norman, and who was the other guy that was with him?
Keith South of Texas.
Keith Sell ran behind him. And according to Nancy Mace came up with the idea to have Donald Trump call them, which seems somewhat obvious. I think at the time I was like, they're going into that room and Donald Trump's going to get on the phone with them.
I'm shocked that she would place herself as the main character in some sort of gossipy battle in Washington.
But here is Ralph Norman, and I'm not even sure I understand what he's trying to communicate here, but here he is explaining why his initial opposition to Johnson changed in the matter of 20 minutes.
Conservatives will be at the table on negotiations. No four corners deal that we get it to the last minute. Let's put people like Chip Roy, I'm just using him as an example, like other people who are true, know how to negotiate, and will fight, and will put things to the American people.
What did Trump say to you? He said that Mike Johnson's the most likable person?
He said, look, I'm in the middle of a golf game. That was the first time I talked to him. And then he said, Mr. President, I hate to. He said, well, you did vote for Nikki Haley. I said, yes, sir, I did. We're with you now. And I said, we will be with Mike Johnson.
Yeah, all right. Now, I wonder what came after you voted for Nikki Haley. I wonder if it was, do you know who Elon Musk is? Mm-hmm. Do you know how much money is going to be deployed against you for voting against me? Don't vote against me twice. And look, this is what's happening with these Republican lawmakers. It's not just happening with the Republican lawmakers. We have time. We'll talk about that story of a Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist who did a cartoon, relatively tame, of Bezos, I think it was Musk, and one or two other billionaires going and holding tribute to the golden image of Donald Trump statue. And the cartoon was pulled. It was the first cartoon she's ever had pulled in the history of her career. So she quit. But this is the dynamic that's going on. And here is now Mike Johnson, newly elected as Speaker of the House. There is two opportunities for reconciliation bills in this next coming calendar year. This dynamic happened, I think, the first year that Democrats had control under Biden as well. And the thing about a reconciliation bill, it's the only bill that needs 50% in the Senate. You cannot filibuster a reconciliation bill. However, everything in this reconciliation bill has to impact directly the U.S. government budget. So you can't put in protect a woman's right to choose, for instance.
Right.
And so it makes it a little bit more complicated to get that 50%. It makes it more complicated. You need narrow things in there. They want to lard it up with sweeteners for different people. Here is Mike Johnson talking about this. So there was talk of making it two separate reconciliation bills so that stuff that upset some people wouldn't be in one bill and stuff that upset another person wouldn't be in another bill, because remember, they have a very thin margin in the House, and it has to comport to what the Senate parliamentarian says. Now, with that said, well, let's listen to this, and then I'll just one more note about the Senate parliamentarian.
Have you spoken with President Trump about what he prefers? Does he want one large reconciliation package to include border security, deportations, as well as tax extensions? Or does he want two, as Senator Lindsey Graham has been working on?
Yeah, he and I have talked about this quite a bit, as you might imagine, over the last few months, determining the pros and cons of the two different strategies. I respect Lindsey Graham and all my friends who kind of preferred a two-step strategy. The idea would be get something done on the border and maybe defense spending right out of the blocks very quickly in what we would call a skinny reconciliation bill, and then do the rest of it in a larger chunk later. But I think at the end of the day, President Trump is going to prefer, as he likes to say, one big, beautiful bill. And there's a lot of merit to that, because we can put it all together, one big up or down vote, which can save the country, quite literally, because there are so many elements to it, and it'll give us a little bit more time to negotiate that and get it right. That doesn't mean that we won't come right out of the gates, full-fledged, right out of the beginning of the Congress. And so we'll be addressing border. We've got a number of bills just over the next 2 weeks, Maria, that we're going to address the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. I think that there's some things that are so common sense that we've got to fix on the border. We might even be able to get some Democrat votes on some of that legislation, but we'll pass it out of the House and send it over to the Senate and get it ready for when President Trump takes office on January 20th. We have a lot to do and a short amount of time to do it in. So Graham wants to break down the two bills, and we know what happens when things get broken down into two bills. One is designed to pass, and the other one is designed to fail. All the controversial stuff gets put into the second bill. First one passes, second one fails. And that's what they want to do, because they really want the tax cuts. They really don't care about anything else. And this is the safer route, at least for the Senate. In the House, most of these guys, and I do mean guys on the Republican side, their biggest fear is a primary from the right. In the Senate, it's a little bit more tenuous. You've got to run statewide, and
6-year terms.
6-year terms, but the bottom line being that you're exposed to more voters and more cross section of voters. You're not just dealing with in a deep red district. Now, obviously, there are some states that's different, but South Carolina, North Carolina wouldn't be, completely insane to say, someone there could get knocked off. They're going to be a little bit nervous, particularly like with Roy Cooper in North Carolina, for instance. And Thune could dismiss the parliamentarian. This was done under the Bush administration, the second Bush administration, back in 2001, when they wanted to pass their tax cuts.
Which the Democrats would never do, because it would make them look so irresponsible with money. But the Republicans do this all the time. I think you're onto something here, because they could do this, because Trump all he's doing is claiming is that the tariff revenue is going to make up for the tax cuts that they're going to push forward, and for the rich mostly. There is no way that the parliamentarian is going to back up the math on that claim, because there's no logic there.
Well, I don't know if it's just a question of tariffs, because that theoretically would fall, in reconciliation.
That's what he's claiming. I just don't think that there's any merit.
I think it's more about stuff like there are border stuff that don't have anything to do with the budget.
That could be it too.
And there's deportations that don't have anything to do with the budget, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, right. Gotcha. In terms of determining what it
has to impact the budget directly.
Yes.
Now, a tariff would, but there are other things that I'm sure that they all want in their grab bag that have more to do with just sort of like, designing the country as on cultural issues. But we will get to that in a moment. And in a moment, we're going to be talking to Nathan Robinson, editor-in-chief of Current Affairs, author of The Myth of American Idealism, How U.S. Foreign Policy Endangers the World, co-authored with Noam Chomsky. But first, a couple of words from our sponsors. The show is sponsored by Liquid IV. It's the beginning of the year. Everybody's looking to start a new ritual. I am going to, once again, attempt to... Actually, I was going to say try exercising on a regular basis, but Saul and I already jogged for the first time together.
Wow.
Yep.
That's
We
fun.
made it 6.5 minutes.
That's nice.
But it was pretty good. Doesn't matter. Whatever you do, you will come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. It's powered by Liquid Hydroscience. Liquid IV helps you break the mold. Flavors like their new hydration multiplier, sugar-free raspberry lemonade. Ooh, I don't think I've tried that one yet. What? Maybe I have. It's a zero sugar flavor combining notes of ripe, freshly picked raspberries and citrusy, zesty lemon. Is that what this is? Because I know it has the raspberry, but I thought it was raspberry melon. This is, I think, the raspberry melon. But this is it right here. Every day, I am drinking at least a bottle of this. And in the few days that I don't, I actually feel the difference later in the day.
Right.
I think I stay healthier because of this. I've been doing this for 6 years now.
Well, it's got all those vitamins and minerals.
It's got the vitamins and minerals. It also keeps me hydrated. It keeps me hydrated during the show, but I think it also has benefits throughout the day. They have hydration multiplier flavors, acai berry and lemon lime, pina colada. They also got that matcha one. But now I'm also, I'm sort of obsessed with the sugar-free flavors, like raspberry lemonade, white peach, and rainbow sherbet. I wonder they switched out the raspberry melon for lemonade. I got to check that back. Break the mold and your own ritual. Just one stick of 16 ounce of water hydrates better than water alone. 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink. Comes in a little packet, so it's great for travel, great for you if you're on the go. 8 essential vitamins and nutrients, always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com. Use the code MajorityRep, not Majority Report, Majority Rep at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. Also, sponsoring the program today, Delete Me. What is Delete Me? It is a subscription service that removes your personal info from hundreds of data brokers across the internet. You'd be surprised to find out, actually. I mean, Google yourself, but also look at some of these data broker sites. Your name, your contact info, sometimes social security number, home address, information about your family members, your social media, all compiled by data brokers and sold online. They make a profit off your data. Your data is a commodity. Anybody on the web can buy your private details. So if hackers find 2 elements of your password from one website, they can go and find other stuff. All this scam stuff. Hi, Sam. It's USPS, or emails like this. They get that information from data brokers. Now, for me, obviously, doing this job too, it's been pretty important for me to try and limit the amount of personal information that's out there. And I've been using Delete Me for, I don't know, half a dozen years, I think, at this point. And it's just a coincidence now that they've come to become a sponsor of today's episode. I personally recommend and use Delete Me. It's again, it's a subscription service. And why do you need it as a subscription service? Because what Delete Me does, it sends out takedown notices to all the data broker sites, but they repopulate this on a regular basis. So Delete Me sends me a regular privacy report, shows what info they found, where they found it, and what they removed. Put it simply, Delete Me does all the hard work of wiping you and your families. Your families? It doesn't matter. All of your personal information from data broker websites. Take control of your data. Keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now, at a special discount for our listeners today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting the word majority to 64,000. That's text majority to 64000. That's majority to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms or details. Of course, I'll put the link, or I should say that text and information in the podcast and YouTube description. And finally, just one word to a longtime sponsor of the program, GiveWell. If you're a details person like me, you want to know how things really work. Maybe you read like the nutritional labels on food. I hope everybody does that. I often will read the terms and conditions on my, like before I read a lot of that stuff. But when you're giving to a charity, you should take a look at GiveWell. It's an independent resource, has rigorous, transparent research about great giving opportunities. The website will even leave the most detail-oriented reader busy. The amazing thing about GiveWell is they've been doing this for about 17 years now, researching charitable organizations. They direct funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. They have a complete vertical of every mistake they've ever made. In assessments, if they've left out any data, it's really, really impressive. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests these donations are going to save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. You can make your tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell does not take a cut. They do not take a cut of this. All of the money goes to the charity. The Boston Globe called GiveWell the gold standard for giving. Here's a couple of examples. Bed nets to prevent malaria cost about $5 for one net. Nets can reduce the number of malaria infections. Enough nets and large enough drop in infections can save a life in expectations. And this is the one that I really like. Cash incentives for routine childhood vaccines cost about $155 to vaccinate an infant. The funding provides cash transfers to incentivize caregivers to bring babies to clinics for routine childhood vaccinations, which prevent disease, they reduce child mortality, and research shows the best way to help people in extreme poverty is just to give them cash and let them deploy it in the most efficient way possible. Go to givewell.org, find out more, or to make a donation, select podcast, enter the Majority Report with Sam Seder at checkout to make sure that they know you heard about them from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. All right, quick break. Then Nathan J. Robinson, editor-in-chief of Current Affairs, author of The Myth of American Idealism, How U.S. Foreign Policy Endangers the World, co-authored with Noam Chomsky. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program Nathan J. Robinson, editor-in-chief of Current Affairs, author of The Myth of American Idealism, How U.S. Foreign Policy Endangers the World, co-authored with Noam Chomsky. Nathan, welcome to the show. And let me just say, I want to congratulate you not only on the 50th issue of Current Affairs, but also on this book that you've written with Noam Chomsky. It really is fantastic because I'll just say that, I've been reading Noam Chomsky for, I don't know, probably close to 40 years now, which is, I'm old. But to have this in one enterprise, almost like a 101 class on Noam Chomsky is so important. I'm so glad that you did this. Now, this is like a book I'm going to give my daughter, and actually, Howard Zinn's People's History is one of those books, and this one I feel like is very similar in that way. Like, this is a great entry for people.
That's literally what I set out to kind of emulate, because Zinn and Chomsky were friends. They were activists together during the Vietnam War era, and Zinn had that great kind of one-volume summation of his critique of mainstream U.S. history. And Chomsky was never that kind of writer who would sit down and put together like a popularization. I mean, as you say, you've been reading Chomsky for decades. The work is brilliant and insightful, but it can be quite dense. And so I'm glad that you say, you feel that it achieved being that kind of one volume summation, because that's what I set out to work with him on producing is, okay, you have this sprawling body of work across literally 100 books. Yeah. How do we boil down what the critical insights are and kind of introduce them to a new generation of readers? And it's also super important. And then I'm going to actually ask you a question, but I remember, and I've cited this many, many times on this program, interviewing Gore Vidal back in 2004 when we were doing this on radio with Janine Garofalo and I. And he, I think, had just come out with the United States of Amnesia, and I did not understand what he was talking about. Like the idea that we had and now 20 years later, having done this and watching how people have forgotten even stuff that was happening 20 years ago, which to me is in the forefront of my mind, is so important, because this really gives you a sense. And I should say it's mostly almost entirely post World War II, but the U.S. foreign policy through that time, this all stuff is when I'm in college, I'm learning, but it does not seem to be part of the calculation and so again, this is great, but let me ask you a question now. What is the myth of American idealism? Well, as Chomsky describes it, and again, I got to be careful here because, this book is my attempt basically to help Chomsky explain his ideas, right? I'm the co-author, but my job is mainly like an organizer of his ideas. But, what he's always said is that there is this range of public debate on U.S. foreign policy in mainstream opinion across the liberal spectrum, from the New York Times, MSNBC, on the right, to the Wall Street Journal editorial page and the National Review, what you hear among people in the Council of Foreign Relations, what have you. And that spectrum, right, runs from America can do no wrong, as George H.W. Bush said, I will never apologize for America. I don't care what the facts are. We literally, by definition, can do no wrong, to what Chomsky calls noble mistake theory. That is to say, we do things that are wrong, but we always do them out of a sense of pure principle idealism. And so the Iraq War was a terrible idealistic mistake. We tried to bring democracy to the people of Iraq, but they just weren't, they couldn't handle democracy. Or Vietnam, we tried to defend democracy in South Vietnam, but we didn't win. It was a tragedy. It was awful. A lot of people died, but we meant well.
well. In Afghanistan, we meant well. And Chomsky's critique has always been that in policy circles, actually, among those who make the decisions, there is very little actual idealism. That the idealism is rhetoric that is for public consumption. But the decisions are actually made with very little regard to, for example, the interests, the welfare of the people of South Vietnam was just not really of interest to Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon. The war, the invasion of Iraq was not an idealistic mission to bring democracy that failed. These are power plays by very powerful men who are in charge of the country. And so Chomsky has always disputed the kind of, yes, he goes after the like America can do no wrong theory, but he's also a very, very powerful and trenchant critic of the kind of liberal defense of American power, which is that we do we do things that we mean well, but then they go wrong.
Well, never has this been more evident than in this current moment, right? With Biden's support for the genocide in Gaza, right? And when you compare it, of course, to just more bloodthirsty, but fairly identical kind of outcomes that the right wants, because Brett McGurk across administrations, the Abraham Accords across administrations on this front. But like, how do you and Chomsky as well square that cynical use of idealism with the fact that a lot of what foreign policy and the execution of foreign policy is in this country is so disconnected from public opinion, particularly at this moment, that there's that chasm there?
Yeah, that's right. And one of the important points in the book is that when we're talking about American idealism, usually we're talking about the powerful. The book is not, Chomsky's often called like anti-American or a critic of America. That's a little misleading. We draw a major distinction between the American people, who have always been in public opinion polls, pretty instinctively anti-war. One of the reasons that government has to do a lot of nefarious things in secret is because when the population finds out about them, they're horrified. So yes, and then we have a whole chapter on the kind of disconnect between popular opinion and actual public policy. But on what you were saying about Gaza, one of the reasons that Chomsky is so critical of liberal opinion is because he thinks it's almost more dangerous to have people like Joe Biden, who over the course of and I just did an article on foreign policy about the way that the Biden administration faked its negotiations for a ceasefire. Basically, at every stage of the war, they've said, the war is a tragedy. We want it to end. We're trying to negotiate a ceasefire. But they had decided from the outset that they weren't ever going to pressure Israel to agree to a ceasefire. So the negotiations, therefore, couldn't succeed, because in order for them to succeed, you'd have to pressure Israel. But the Biden administration has put up this front of, we really are doing everything. We're working tirelessly every day to try and achieve a ceasefire. Now, on the right, the pro-Israel side, the people like Mike Huckabee are just like, we don't want a ceasefire. Israel could do what it wants. That's our policy, is for Israel to do whatever it wants. But the Biden administration has this extra layer of deceit, this mask of idealism. And for Chomsky, that's actually quite dangerous, because it has the power to convince people.
Yeah, I just remember Thomas Friedman's role in the context of Iraq War, and that, in many respects, it's hard to sort of say who is one person determinant, in terms of like the tipping point for public support. But Friedman was the guy who otherwise sort of like reasonable liberals who would be vaguely anti-war unless it was absolutely necessary. He was the one who sort of like brought in that last constituency that, was necessary to be able to, I guess, get a lot of frankly, Democrats and presidential hopefuls at that time to vote to give Bush that authorization. But I want to make one other point too before we go forward. The thing about Chomsky, which I think is misunderstood, unless I think you have listened to a lot of his interviews, because he does address this, but is that this is not campism. Like the idea is not that America is uniquely bad, but is typically bad.
Yeah. He says we're no worse than others, but we're no better than others either. Right, but we are especially powerful, which is one of the reasons that our actions require attention, and we're also have this very, very powerful mythology about our goodness and our mission in the world, which also makes us kind of especially dangerous. But I actually asked him in an interview. I asked him, about this question of anti-Americanism or singling us out, and he said, he literally said, we're no worse than others, and he started talking about the British Empire and the French in Vietnam and atrocities around the world. In fact, people have accused him of being an apologist for Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but he says very clearly, Vladimir Putin is a war criminal, he's a gangster. The invasion of Ukraine was the worst violation of international law since the Iraq War, right? Since our own violation of the law against wars of aggression.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a point that's lost on people, and it's used on some level as a way of discrediting his thesis, and I maybe purposely misunderstanding it in great respect. What accounts is the U.S. unique in its creating this myth about its workings in the world, or is it just unique in the sense that it is so powerful?
It may be unique in some sense in that it's but the component of this myth that is about spreading our model to the rest of the world. You don't really see that kind of rhetoric in that expansionist kind of rhetoric.
Democracy versus civilization, right? That might be an updated way. Sorry to cut you off.
No, you don't see quite that kind of stuff in China, for example. I mean, obviously, you can call China expansionist in its desire to take over Taiwan, but you don't see that kind of that missionary zeal that we've always had in the United States, the kind of city on a hill stuff, the international inclination. But he points out that these kinds of myths, like war myths, war propaganda, are very common everywhere. And the Russian myths about what they're doing in Ukraine, that they're fighting a war against Nazism, and they're fighting a war to defend their way of life against unprovoked aggression. These are literally the myths that every side in every war uses, right? So, no matter what, and sometimes that doesn't mean there's no right and wrong in war, just because both sides have these mythologies. But every party to a war always sees its own role as defensive. The Japanese in World War II saw themselves as acting defensively. Even Hitler's rhetoric was defensive rhetoric, suggesting that they were under attack. That Germans were under attack in Czechoslovakia, that Jews were attacking German civilization, and so all the rhetoric is always defensive.
Let's talk about the how the U.S. Maintains, or the methodology of it maintaining, or its attempt to maintain hegemony. What you call the, or I guess Chomsky calls the mafia doctrine. Explain that to us.
Well, the mafia doctrine has what Chomsky talks about is it compares the operations, the thinking of policymakers to the thinking of a kind of mafia godfather. And in case that sounds too cynical, he goes back and draws from, and we recompile in this book, a lot of rhetoric from a lot of language from internal planning documents. There's a wonderful archive that the Office of the State Department historian has, where you can go through and you can see all the memos that are used. And we quote, for example, from a 1950s memo from the Eisenhower administration, where they're talking about whether they should help Britain retain control of Kuwait. And they're talking about how it would affect American interests, entirely about how it would affect American interests. No mention at all as to whether Britain is entitled to retain control of Kuwait or the interests of the people of Kuwait. And so what Chomsky argues, and what I think is proven by a lot of documentation, is that the internal discussions are generally about power. They are generally not about what the public rhetoric is about. So in Vietnam, for instance, the rhetoric is not, the internal discussion is about U.S. credibility and U.S. power and what would happen to the United States if we were to lose in Vietnam, and not about what would happen to the people of South Vietnam, though obviously the public speeches are all about, well, we're trying to protect the people of South Vietnam from communist aggression. But when things like the Pentagon Papers come out, you find out that that's not what they were talking about. What they were talking about is, what is this going to do to U.S. prestige and U.S. power if a lot of peasants in the jungle are seen to defeat us? And the same with Cuba, where the public rhetoric is about Cuba being a dictatorship, but in private they're talking about, well, what is it going to mean for the United States if a country this close to us, a few miles off the shores of Florida, is able to defy us? And what we need to do is we need to make sure that they are not able to ostentatiously thumb their noses at us. And what Chomsky says is, well, essentially this is completely amoral. This is divorced from, this is the way mafia godfathers think. They think about their own interests, and they're not interested in things like human rights, which are kind of window dressing. And so, yeah, the idea is the policy making itself is generally purely self-interested.
I want to get into what constitutes that self-interest as a nation, but staying on this point for a moment, and it's also about it's usually small and weaker entities that in and of themselves don't create a risk, but set a precedent. I remember interviewing, as an analog, Shannon Moore is an activist up in Alaska. She was a radio host at the time, and they were having a big fight about the Pebble Mine, which is right on the opening of, I think it's Bristol Bay. And she had shown she sat down with the Pebble Mine lawyers and made a great case as to why it just wasn't worth it for them to do this. Mm-hmm. And their response was you don't understand. We don't care about this mine. It's just that if we allow the EPA to keep us from getting this mine here, it sets a precedent for every other mine around the country. And so this is not about this fight. This is about some other big fight. And it seems to me I remember Thomas Friedman being interviewed with Charlie Rose. Why did we go to Iraq? And he just said, Charlie, because we could. And that was someone, there was a terrorism bubble, and we had to pop the bubble. But the point was we don't necessarily do these things because they are strategic in a material sense, but they create a perception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What Chomsky's always argued is that in some sense the domino theory, which is supposedly discredited, was actually true and did reflect how they thought, which is basic. But it wasn't, that communism would spread. It was that, as Chomsky says, in the case of a godfather, if some small shopkeeper defies him, he sends his goons down around to break his legs, not because he actually needs the protection money from that one shopkeeper, but because, as you say, it sets this kind of precedent. And that kind of language about precedent, in fact, that's quite open. That's not even internal, right? When Nixon's talking about Vietnam, he's talking about U.S. prestige and basically saying we have to win in Vietnam. We have to have the phrase they used was peace with honor, and what peace with honor meant was that if we are seen to lose, that will be bad for us because we will seem like losers, and then it will embolden other people to defy us. So we need to show with extreme violence what happens when you defy the United States, and that is a kind of Godfather-like thinking. It's really disturbing, actually, when you think about the fact that these are human beings, right, that are killed in these wars. That when you see rhetoric like, well, we can't lose we have to support the Shah because if we don't support this horrible, brutal dictator against this popular uprising, our other dictator allies are going to think that we're not going to stand by them. I mean, when you see that kind of rhetoric, it's really, really disturbing.
There was also, and this comes up in the book too. I think it was in for the Iraq War, or maybe it was the first one, where the era of the Vietnam syndrome is over. The celebration of the end of the reluctance of the American public to wage war Just talk about that for
Oh yeah, no, this is the first Gulf War, which we talk a bit about. Really needs to be revisited because it's one of those wars that's seen as one of our like good wars, but it actually wasn't. And this whole thing about
the babies in the incubators.
Yeah, right. All the war propaganda, but also the fact that the war probably could have been averted. And the Bush administration was talking about like how they needed to avoid a diplomatic resolution to the conflict, right? Because Saddam Hussein was like sending out feelers that suggested that he knew he'd made a mistake by invading Kuwait because he didn't understand that the United States would react very badly to it, and was trying to like work out a way to withdraw and kind of save face. And we were like, no. And the Bush administration was essentially trying to avoid that kind of face-saving outcome that would have been a diplomatic resolution, because they saw an opportunity here to show, as George H.W. Bush himself said, that what we say goes. Like, that was the phrase he used. He said, we have to show that what we say goes. And so there was a war that probably could have been avoided through a bit of careful diplomacy. Of course, we don't really know for sure. But yes, you mentioned the Vietnam syndrome. The thought was that the war was great because it had helped overcome that public reluctance to support the use of force that had developed after the catastrophe of Vietnam, and had been one of the reasons why the Reagan administration felt that they couldn't actually wage an outright war in Central America. So the idea was, well, now this is great because we've shown that there can be good wars, and hopefully this syndrome, which is essentially like the public's anti-war, and we kind of had that after the Iraq War too. We have the similar Iraq syndrome, where now like even people like Donald Trump have to kind of posture as anti-war. Well, that really existed after Vietnam, but it was overcome with this great little war we had in the early 90s.
How much do we know about that first Kuwait? Because certainly by within a couple of years, maybe I can't remember exactly when, but there was at least an awareness for people who were interested in this type of thing that. Was it April Glaspie? Was that the name of the our ambassador? She went to talk to, and people forget that we supported Saddam Hussein in his war against Iran, to the point where there's photos of Donald Rumsfeld shaking hands when Donald Rumsfeld was CEO, I think, of a chemical sort of arms dealer and manufacturer. And we provided chemical weapons for Saddam Hussein that he ultimately used against Kurds up there, but also in his war on Iran. And the idea was like, okay, this is going to help our hegemony as a bulwark against Iran. And when Glaspie went to meet with Hussein, who was like, do you have a problem with my invasion of Kuwait? She's like, we don't get involved in this, which sent basically the signal of like, it's up to you. And then, but do we have a better understanding of what that dynamic is at this point?
Well, so when she went to meet with Hussein, he didn't say he was going to invade Kuwait, but the quote was that the United States have no opinion on Arab conflicts like your border disagreement with Kuwait. The issue is not associated with America. All that we hope is that these issues are solved quickly, which supposedly Hussein interpreted to mean that the United States would not react if he invaded Kuwait. There's even this quote that I'm not sure how good the sourcing on it is, but allegedly when he was interrogated, he said, after being captured, if you hadn't wanted me to invade, you should have just told me that you didn't want me to invade Kuwait. It's certainly true. I think we know for certain that the United States did not send a strong signal to Saddam Hussein before the invasion of Kuwait that it would object forcefully to this, and that after the invasion of Kuwait, the United States shut down possible diplomatic opportunities, which we kind of recount in the book. And as you mentioned, the record of U.S. support for Saddam Hussein, which we did up until the invasion of Kuwait, was really, really atrocious. I mean, not only did what we did was as Saddam Hussein was committing some of the worst crimes in the history of the 20th century, right, the use of chemical weapons against the Iranian population, we were concealing the evidence and, in fact, helping him, and making sure that the UN didn't find out that he was doing this, and casting doubt on the existing evidence that he was using chemical weapons. Because, as you say, at that point, Saddam was considered to be useful, but then he got too big for his britches and he needed to be taught a lesson. So again, where's the idealism? There's the mask of idealism. The Gulf War is couched in idealistic rhetoric. But Saddam's worst crimes were done during the era of U.S. support, and then there's no accountability for those who supported him. And in fact, the craziest fact to me is that the Bush, we're always told that they didn't find weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but that is not strictly true. They found some weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but they didn't publicize it because they were weapons from the era where we've been supporting Saddam, and we didn't want to have to discuss that.
And I mean, and also, and let me just say this, the definition of weapons of mass destruction at that time sort of became very, very expansive. Right. I mean, the amount of like anthrax that you need on a battlefield to kill, even 100 men is just enormous. Like they thought they would find weapons of mass destruction there because we had sold it to them, and they just assumed there was more there. But this stuff was not weapons of mass destruction in the way that we were sold this. There was no mushroom cloud. There was not. You were not going to kill hundreds of thousands of people in New York City.
There was nothing that posed a threat. It was like rusty relics of the 1980s.
100%. And all right, but let's talk about interest, right? Because like there's this couching of U.S. Sort of realpolitik interests, as it were, in this notion of we're spreading democracy or we're helping, spread freedom or whatever it is. But even the concept of what is U.S. interests is sort of is in somewhat veiled as to what we mean by that.
That's right. So you might even say that you think, okay, well, perhaps it's legitimate for states to pursue their own interests. Perhaps they don't need to be idealistic on the international stage. I see through all that. I understand that the world is a bunch of cynical power games. On the other hand, the job of the United States government is, in fact, to look out for American interests. But one of the crucial things that Chomsky does that you point to here is to unpack this term. Well, what are American interests? Well, the thing is that we live in a highly unequal society. I mean, we live in a very class-divided society. And so there isn't one thing called the American interest. There are lots of interests operating within the society, and the interests of some people diverge from the interests of other people. And what's good for fossil fuel companies and what's good for weapons companies is not what's good for the population at large, right? The population at large is not served by the exacerbation of the climate catastrophe. The profits of the fossil fuel industry are, however, served by the exacerbation of climate change. So is the pursuit, if we're pursuing American interests, which of those things is the American interest? Well, what we would argue is that the interests of the society are American interests, but that this term is often used to mask what is in fact a special or particular interest of some powerful or dominant segment of society.
And we should say, it's not just like, when we say like fossil fuel and weapons manufacturers, those may be the most sort of nefarious commodities that are, but it goes back to bananas even. I mean, this is, the idea is that like we're protecting corporate interests,
right,
and making sure that other countries cannot essentially keep their resources to benefit or profit themselves. And, when we've got to deploy military resources to protect someone's ability to corner the banana market in, production in Honduras, 100 some odd years ago, we all end up paying for. This is just like a classic case of socializing the cost and privatizing the profits. We're just doing it with other people's profits.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned fruit, the obvious example being when the United States overthrew the government of Guatemala during the Eisenhower administration after it threatened the profits of the United Fruit Company, and then plunged Guatemala into half a century of horrible civil war and genocide. And then we wonder why there are so many Central American migrants coming to the United States, because we're not told about any of the things that we actually did. The same in Iran, where at the same time, the Iranians moved to nationalize oil production so that they could benefit from their own resources, and we overthrew their government, or worked with elements in Iranian society to overthrow their government, install a horrible military dictatorship, and created the massive anti-American sentiment that persists in Iran to this day and is the source of major global conflict. So one of the important points is that we're not told about any of the things. We're only told about the crimes of others. We're not told about any of the things that we do that cause backlash and response. That was one of Chomsky's main points after the 9/11 attacks. And if we understood these things, we would understand that our interests do, in fact, diverge from what is used rhetorically as the American interest.
Let's talk about much of this stuff that sort of like brings us up, is historical. But there are a couple of things that get touched on, and in the book that are very much in our future. And particularly in terms of our relationship with China. Give us a sense of what Chomsky's perspective is on this dynamic between Taiwan and mainland China.
Well, it's certainly not a defense of the authoritarianism of the Chinese government. But what he does point out over and over is that China is portrayed as a threat to the United States without much evidence for that. And a lot of things that are done in response to the perceived China threat, in fact, create the very threat that they're intended to guard against. There's been all this talk about the, quote, pivot to Asia that a lot of people in foreign policy circles believe is necessary, which consists a lot of kind of militarizing the region that is called the Indo-Pacific. This, in turn, makes China feel surrounded by U.S. military power and creates a military response, which in turn creates further evidence for supposed China threat. And again, this is a situation where we do to China things that we would perceive as aggression if they were done against us. Chomsky points to the Cuban Missile Crisis, the stationing of Soviet missiles in Cuba in 1962, this idea that by coming into our domain, that was an act of aggression. Well, we do similar things to China, but we don't expect them to interpret it as an act of aggression. We talk a lot about Chinese spying. There's a new thing just today in the paper this morning about Chinese hacking, but we don't talk about our spying in China, which is also extensive. We expect them to tolerate things that we would never tolerate ourselves. And what Chomsky points out is that to understand what the actual situation is, you have to understand what both sides are doing. And in fact, this is the situation with China is an example of what is classically referred to in foreign policy as the security dilemma, which is a name for a situation where each side takes actions that it perceives as defensive, but that the other side perceives as offensive. And one of the core arguments that Chomsky makes about why U.S. foreign policy endangers the world, as the subtitle of the book says, is that we don't ever analyze the things that we do, we always perceive as defensive, that are then perceived as aggressive by the other side, that then create a reaction that we perceive as aggression, requiring more things that we see as defense or security on our side, which creates further reaction on the other side. And that understanding, that self-scrutiny, know thyself, he says, is crucial to keeping these conflicts from getting out of control. Like the conflict with China, he warns that if it gets out of control, I mean, this could be a nuclear war between great powers. I mean, it could be a massive arms race. It could be a real human catastrophe, the worst in our history.
But how much of that, like, I mean, some of that sounds a little bit like the bumbling empire theory, as opposed to this is our way of saying, like, look, we are setting our boundaries for some economic territory. Like, we want, and like so much of this was outlined in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is basically saying, like, we're going to have hegemony over the economic system of everything that surrounds you, so that our, whatever we produce is produced under, and the rules of essentially the world are our rules, our copyright, our trademark, our production flow, whatever it is. And the military part in there is to go, like, and if you don't like it, we're gonna do this brinksmanship. Like, how, where does that, I mean, it feels like, on some level, like, we don't know what we're doing in escalating, but I sort of feel like we do. We're playing chicken, and we're doing it because we want to have this economic control. And by we, I mean the certain corporations want the economic control.
And we have like the infrastructure to actually have that threat of military dominance, which other countries don't. So we can back it up. This
is critically important because, again, you're going to see in all discussions about Taiwan, they're all framed in idealistic terms. Taiwan is a democracy. China poses a threat to this democracy. We have to protect this little democracy. Now, it's true that Taiwan is under threat from an authoritarian government in China. That's not false, but it is false that that's the reason why the United States is so committed to making sure that China does not absorb Taiwan. And if you look at U.S. national security documents, if you look at the national security strategy written under Trump or Biden, they're all pretty open about saying that what we're trying to do is contain China's rise and maintain American power in the Indo-Pacific. And that what we don't want is a competitor power. It's remarkable when you actually read documents written by the United States government, how openly they talk in these power terms, these power concepts about containing the rise of China. And then all of the idealism kind of slips away, and we understand that what we're concerned with is our country's power relative to other countries' power.
Let's talk a little bit about, like, what we can do about this, because it is rare, it seems to me, that any of our foreign policy really makes a huge difference to Americans. Now, I would say, like, I'll put an asterisk and alongside that. I think, if you're under the age of 40 and are on social media, like, your awareness and I think disgust about what's happening in Gaza is really different than it's been since I think, like, Vietnam was televised, the first televised war. But of course, in Vietnam, there was the added sort of dynamic of a lot of U.S. Young people going to fight in this war, and I think there was an anti-war movement for the Iraq War, but it was largely ignored, and if anything, it impacted the outcome of elections. For and against, equally, in terms of, like, so what is the solution, to the extent that there is one, to this?
Yeah, well, the book, when people crack over the book, they'll see that it does in fact end on a kind of optimistic note, which I made sure of, because Chomsky doesn't always end on an optimistic note, but he does say here and there optimistic things about social movements and what they can accomplish and what they have accomplished, in fact, in his own lifetime. He was really impressed by the rising anti-war movement around Vietnam, because for the first few years there was no anti-war movement, and then anti-war sentiment developed, and it did constrain the actions of the United States government. I mean, not sufficiently, and the war dragged on, and you could say that there's arguments over the extent to which the anti-war movement actually made a difference. But one thing that he argues is clear that one of the respect in which it did make a difference was the Vietnam syndrome, which we have discussed, which is to say that after the Vietnam War, even if it didn't stop the Vietnam War, it created that public reluctance to support the use of force that then forced the United States government to rely more on small-scale and covert activities in Central America, for example. And in fact, in Central America, when Iran-Contra happened, it was Democrats who were kind of formed by the experience of the Vietnam War, who were leading the opposition to Reagan, fairly mainstream Democrats. There was a healthy anti-war sentiment in the country that constrained the Reagan administration's ability to act. And I would argue that even though the Iraq War movement didn't stop the Iraq War, the fact that there was a huge movement and then that movement was completely vindicated by what actually happened in the war, really established a baseline anti-war consensus in the United States that is enduring to this day.
It certainly helped Trump, I think, on some level.
Yeah.
I mean, sadly enough.
Trump has to posture as anti-war, right? Trump understands that the public is anti-war. He promises, if you look at his speeches, he's constantly promising peace. He's saying, well, the Democrats are going to drag us into World War III. I'm going to prevent World War III. He's lamenting what happened in Gaza, saying never would have happened on his watch. I'm going to keep you out of war is basically like Trump's message. And in fact, it even got like a number of Muslim voters to support Trump. The Iraq War movement had a really positive long-term effect on public opinion in American politics. Like, yeah, it's true that Biden just announced another $8 billion in weapons aid to Israel, but I would also argue that the anti-war sentiment in the United States is part of why the Democrats just lost an election, and that it's hard. It's very, very hard for the public to constrain the use of American power when the leaders of both parties are going to pursue similar policies, right? I don't think we're going to see that much difference between Trump and Biden and what they're doing in Gaza. So what the public can do is quite limited. But at the same time, what alternative is there but to scrutinize, to expose the myths, to expose what is actually happening, and do what you can to try and keep atrocities from continuing indefinitely.
All right. Lastly, let me ask you this. I mean, over the course, obviously, you're working on a book that is more focused on foreign policy and sort of the way that the U.S. Public is manipulated or at least kept in the dark as to what the actual agendas are and where it's going. But over the course of the time that you were working on the book with Chomsky, and he's obviously very late in life and is not doing particularly well and largely incommunicado as far as I can tell. But over the course of the time that you were working with him and even prior to that, what was your sense of his, where was he domestically in terms of optimism or pessimism? Or was it? I mean, there's a quality of Chomsky where it's almost like he doesn't have optimism or pessimism. It's more like this is the way it is, and this is what needs to be done.
Yeah. I think that's an accurate characterization. I mean, he says, and we have at the end of the book, essentially there's one alternative is say, let's give up, which guarantees, he says, that the worst will happen. And the other is to say, we want things to be better, so we're going to try to make them better. He quotes the old phrase, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. I think it's fair to say that before, he had a major stroke in 2023 that left him, and he hasn't been doing interviews since then. But in the lead up to that, he was not feeling particularly hopeful about the state of the world. He'd been very inspired by the Bernie Sanders movement, and then, very depressed by the rise of Donald Trump, who he consistently called the worst criminal in human history. And he included Hitler in that because he literally thinks Trump is worse than Hitler because of because of the long-term effects of the climate catastrophe. So not feeling particularly good, but never lost that sense that there is essential. I mean, a man who is at 95 doing constant interviews and writing, trying desperately to change the world, is not someone who has lost all hope that things can be different, right? Up until the point where he could no longer do the work he was doing, he has been an activist from the moment that the Vietnam War started to the present day.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like Boober or somebody who says like, you got a choice to believe in God or not. It's just it's easier to believe in it. You don't really have much other choice on some level. I'm not sure I subscribe to that, but that is, we got really basically two choices. One is give up, or one is to not give up. Again, congratulations on this book. It really. Oh, there we go.
There it is.
Oh, there we go.
What do they call that?
Mirror
Twinning?
image.
It's not
Nathan J.
2010.
Robinson, editor in chief of Current Affairs. The book is Myth of American Idealism: How U.S. Foreign Policy Endangers the World. Also, congrats again on Current Affairs' 50th
50 print issues. Print magazine making it to 50.
Still
in 2024.
Still kicking around. 2025.
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh,
I made the same mistake today. We'll put a link both to the book and Current Affairs. Nathan, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks, Sam. Thanks, Emma. Nice to see you both.
Thanks, Nathan.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we're going to take a brief break, head into the fun half of the program. Good time to remind you, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. When you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, but you also get the fun half. Also, just want to do a shout out to all the people who have on Twitch have Prime membership. A part of your Prime membership, you can dedicate your subscription to Twitch for the month to the Majority Report at no cost to you.
We just had Empty Head 010 and Trans Women doing that on 18 and 9 minutes ago.
Oh, wow. You can see that in real time?
Yep.
Well, all right. Well, thank you very much.
Very nice.
It helps over there. Costs you nothing if you got a Prime subscription. Of course, Twitch super poggers, and I'm not.
So many trains.
I'm not fishing for a hype train right now. But
oh, there's one incoming.
Oh,
here we go. Choo choo.
Also, don't
Lord
forget
Dragon and Cornelius Funk just in with the Prime subscriptions.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, wow.
Oh, we're cruising now.
Also, don't forget the AM Quickie. AMQuickie.com. Get the day's news in about a 5-minute read. Jacob and Corey do a great job over there. And it's free 3 days a week. So you can sign up at amquickie.com, amquickie.com. Emma. Why don't you, have you put on the new Emma Majority Report hats?
I'm not putting on a hat. Okay. All right, fine. I'll put on the hat. I'll put on the hat.
This is in the
This is a real delicate situation up here.
I have to say, here, I'll put it on.
These hats better? No, I'm doing it.
This hat is
my
sweet.
brand.
I like that gray.
Yeah.
That is my color for a hat.
That's what I'm saying. It goes with blue. It goes with black. You can wear it with anything.
You will
Listen, I want my hat in gunmetal.
It's a Majority Report hat. You can get that at shop.majorityreportradio.com.
We're at
Break
level
this brim
7
in.
hype train now.
All right.
Yeah.
I took 2
Level
home
7?
if you want this one. You were supposed to take one. You want to wear it.
I did wear it home.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. We got more here than I thought we did.
Saul was excited about that hat. Oh, Matt puts his left reckoning hat on.
There you go.
Emma, ESPN.
Oh, we will be talking about, obviously, the divisional round coming up, the playoffs, youtube.com/ESPN show for that.
And Left Reckoning, leftreckoning.com/store to get this hat, and there's other colors available. And we'll be
can
live.
only see the hat.
We'll be live tomorrow night with a new show, probably talking about Trudeau and stuff. So check it. And we talked about the H-1B thing for patrons. Patreon.com/leftreckoning.
All right, folks. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males.
Psych. Fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.